Tonight, a $1 billion threat to the BBC. The US president's lawyers tell the broadcaster it's on notice for the editing of a speech he made on the day the Capitol was stormed. Departures from the top and an apology from BBC chair Samir Shah, so far not enough to contain the crisis.
The apologising is for the way the team edited President Trump's speech to his supporters on January the 6th.
So how has the BBC found itself without a leader just as it faces a review of the charter that determines its funding? Also ahead, once hunted by the US, now Syrian leader Ahmed al-Sharaa is welcome to the White House. As Nigeria is accused of failing to protect its Christians, we investigate if they're being targeted more than others. Plus, a get-out-of-jail card for Nicolas Sarkozy, the former French president, is released to appeal his conviction for criminal conspiracy. And after a Gen Z uprising forced Madagascar's president to flee, we asked the colonel in charge if he's up to the task. All that and more coming up in The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening and welcome to the programme. The crisis engulfing the BBC intensified further today with a $1 billion legal threat. That's how much President Trump is threatening to sue the corporation unless it meets demands including retracting the documentary at the centre of the storm. The Panorama programme edited together two separate parts of President Trump's speech from January 6, 2021. His lawyers say this gave the impression that he incited the Capitol riots that followed, a criticism the BBC accepts. President Trump's threat to sue the BBC is the latest in a long list of battles he's fought with the media. But is there a danger that criticism of the corporation feeds a Trump narrative that critical coverage is fake news? We begin tonight with this report from our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer.
Resignations, rumours of a coup, and now a looming legal threat. If things weren't bad enough at New Broadcasting House following the resignation of Director General Tim Davie and his news CEO Deborah Turness,
we're going to walk down and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down.
Cue confirmation that US President Donald Trump is so enraged by how his speech was doctored in this episode of Panorama, he's now threatening to sue. This, a copy of the letter sent on his behalf, the last line of which saying if the BBC doesn't retract the programme and apologise by November the 14th at 5 p.m, President Trump will be left with no alternative but to enforce his legal and equitable rights by filing legal action for no less than $1 billion in damages. The BBC, it says, is on notice. Today, a written apology to MPs from the chair, Samir Shah, one of the last men standing, as he spoke to his own news channel about what went wrong.
The apologising is for the way the team edited President Trump's speech to his supporters on January the 6th.
The chain of events which has upended things within the BBC was triggered by a memo from Michael Prescott, a former external advisor to the BBC's Editorial Standards Committee, raising concerns about institutional bias over Gaza, gender identity and immigration issues.
All these stories and issues that Mr. Prescott raises have been considered at the committee. In fact, indeed, that's how he knows about them, because he's a member of the advisory. So I don't think it's fair to characterise it as some kind of uncovery. Secondly, there's also an impression given that we've listened to these concerns and we've done nothing. And that is also not an accurate representation of both what Mr. Prescott says and what the BBC has done.
We heard nothing from the Director General and his news CEO in the days after the memo went to press. And while there was no sign of Davie in his office, Turness entered by the front door saying this.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
So what exactly has been going on inside of New Broadcasting House? Sky News understands that Deborah Turness had wanted to get a statement out early last week, but was blocked by the BBC board, which was arguing over the wording. Now, some of the BBC's own journalists have gone on the record to say what we're actually seeing play out now goes back much further than the last week, with claims that within the BBC there are those who have systematically set out to undermine Tim Davie and his senior leadership for a long time now, a coup being the implication from within the BBC board. Former senior insiders say the corporation's problems extend beyond the boardroom.
I think we're now seeing that there was, of course, the leaks to the Telegraph, and some of the campaigning inside the BBC probably does have a degree of political motivation. But then equally, we know this year that Lisa Nandy, the Labour Culture Secretary, seemed at one point to be trying to get Tim Davie fired. And the fact is the BBC always has these political cross currents, and it's got to withstand them.
A national broadcaster without a leader and facing $1 billion threat. Sounding like a plot from one of its dramas, a very real problem the BBC now faces. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, let's bring in our US correspondent James Matthews, who joins me live from Washington. James, a dark day for the BBC, and as we were hearing there from Katie and, of course, from President Trump, a direct and clear warning from him.
Yeah, hi, Yalda. I mean, Donald Trump makes a habit of targeting the media. Its effect runs deep, not just for the organisation in question, but for the media at large, other outfits who are watching this and, of course, fear the prospect of legal action, the potential costs of that. And that has to be part of all of this. Donald Trump putting pressure, leaning on the media across the board. Not for the first time, he is smelling the money in all of this. Remember, this is a president who has never been slow to pursue companies with legal threats, and it's worked for him in the past. We've seen that. He got $16 million from CBS, $15 million from ABC, their parent companies. I suppose those figures might be a guide to the kind of amount that he has in his mind when he talks about compensation. His argument, as fleshed out in that letter, is that essentially the BBC has trashed his reputation. His lawyers are saying this Panorama programme and this dodgy edit were designed to, what they say, was deliberately denigrate the president, showed a reckless disregard for the truth. And they're saying that millions saw this worldwide, causing the president what they call overwhelming financial and reputational harm. So they're laying out their list of demands in this letter. They want a full and fair retraction of the documentary, an apology, which they have. They also want this compensation for what they say is harm caused. If they don't get it by close of play on Friday, this lawsuit for $1 billion will kick in. And of course, as Katie said in their letter, it ends on this phrase, the BBC is on notice, rather darkly. It's the action, Yalda, of a president, like I say, who leans on the media like we haven't seen from the White House before. He routinely rails against outlets for negative coverage of him, and he covets those organisations who are more sympathetic. That's the bigger picture in all this. The Trump narrative is that critical coverage is fake news, and unfortunately, the mistake made here threatens to undermine scrutiny of the White House at a time when it's never been more important and rarely been more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely, James. We'll have to wait and see how this plays out over the course of the next few days, certainly by Friday. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. Well, staying in Washington, and President Trump has kept it low-key as he hosted Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa at the White House earlier. Their Oval Office meeting was closed to the media, and al-Sharaa entered the White House away from the driveway used by other visiting foreign leaders. Still, it's an extraordinary turn of events for a man who was once tied to al-Qaeda with a $10 million bounty on his head. More from the meeting shortly. But first, a reminder of the eruptions of violence that have shaken al-Shara's rule since he toppled Bashar al-Assad at the end of last year. In March, more than 1,000 members of the minority Alawite community were killed in attacks by Sunni fighters. They were responding to attacks by former officers loyal to Bashar al-Assad, who's an Alawite. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, reported on this from inside Syria. Have a look.
Alawites, a minority group which the Assad family is part of, were targeted. Their villages were destroyed and are now battered and virtually deserted. As many as 10,000 Alawites are now camping in a Russian airbase, seeking shelter, watched on by Russian soldiers who remain inside the base. As we arrived, we were surrounded. All these people described being burnt out of their homes and family members murdered in cold blood in revenge.
The people died.
Mainly men, but women and children as well. They trust nobody now and want international help. Some of the thousands are in tents or under makeshift cover. Others are sleeping rough or in their cars. We were told that whole families had been killed, with some buried in mass graves. The scene of some of the worst violence happened in the city of Jabla, when the pro-Assad militia attacked. What happened here may be the catalyst for what followed.
Well, the government points out that it was Assad loyalists drawn from the Alawite community who carried out attacks on checkpoints like this in Jabla that had been previously calm. They say they were serious, coordinated attacks, as you can see from the destruction that's all around us.
That was our Stuart Ramsey reporting from Syria in March. Let's go straight to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who joins me now. And Mark, it's not often that we have visiting dignitaries come to the White House and basically be kept hidden away from the media. But this is an exceptional meeting at quite an extraordinary time.
Yeah, a very delicate time. It's also not often or not ever, that a man who was once in Iraq fighting the Americans back in 2003-04, a man who was imprisoned by the Americans in the notorious Abu Ghraib prison, a man who was the leader of the Nusra Front, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda, makes it to the Oval Office. But there he is. Quite a remarkable set of images there released in the last hour or so by the Syrian presidency of that meeting that took place this morning. Ahmed al-Shara, perhaps intentionally choosing to wear a red tie and a white shirt, matching the dress that Donald Trump seems to like so much. I thought that was very interesting. And around him too, his the ministers within his own government, but also the vice president was there, J.D. Vance, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane was there too. Quite a few American officials to mark an extraordinary moment, an extraordinary journey, and a very intentional decision that the American government has made to lean into this new president, despite his past that I just described. It's clearly the view of Trump's administration that there are opportunities here in many different ways. There are economic opportunities for the United States in Syria, I'm sure. There are geopolitical opportunities. Syria is literally a neighbor of Israel. What Donald Trump would like is that Syria, among other Arab nations, joins the Abraham Accords, normalizing relations with Israel. That would be a huge, huge moment. And of course, in return, what Ahmed al-Shara wants is his normalization, him to be accepted back in, his country to be accepted back into the international community, and for investment to flow into his country to rebuild after so many years of civil war. But as Stuart described there, the challenges are still absolutely huge. The sectarian divisions are significant. And so there's a long way to go. I'm not quite sure why they decided not to allow cameras in at all or any questions. I guess it's the sort of sensitivity of the moment. But it's also the case that Trump is facing some pressure domestically to concentrate more on the home front. That was the phrase that J.D. Vance used as a consequence of the drubbing that they got last week in various elections here in the United States. So maybe that's something to do with it as well. Although this afternoon he was certainly back on the airwaves in the Oval Office at a separate meeting. But a remarkable moment this is for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just have a listen to what was said in the Oval Office a little earlier.
He's a very strong leader. He comes from a very tough place, and he's a tough guy. I liked him. I get along with him, the new president of Syria. And we'll do everything we can to make Syria successful, because that's part of the Middle East. We have peace now in the Middle East, first time that anyone can remember that ever happening. And, Syria is a very big part of the Middle East, very important part. If you look back at Syria for years, they had the doctors, the lawyers, they had so many of the great intellects. It's an amazing place with great people, and we want to see Syria be successful along with the rest of the Middle East. So I have confidence that he'll be able to do the job, absolutely.
That was President Trump a little earlier. And Mark, as you say, quite an extraordinary scene there and those images that came out of the Oval Office. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Well, Ambassador James Jeffrey is a former US special representative for Syria engagement and a former special envoy to the global coalition to defeat ISIS. I asked him how the US president has brought al-Sharaa into the fold and into the White House. Have a listen.
The U.S. government sometimes is a bit more competent in longer planning than one thinks. Back in 2018, when I was the Syria envoy for Trump's first administration, we identified Sharaa, his organization, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, in Idlib as strategic territory that had to be held by the opposition, specifically al-Jolani, now al-Sharaa. We didn't have a direct relationship with him, but we very much wanted him to succeed. And of course, we didn't imagine he would succeed as brilliantly as he did in December. Now, President Trump is leading the international community to embrace this guy, not because he's the best guy in the world, but he's the best guy we have.
Yeah, I mean, again, I find what you're saying quite extraordinary, given his history with al-Qaeda, with al-Nusra, with these various terrorist organizations, you know, his own history going back all the way to when he was a bomb maker in Iraq, the years he spent in these black prisons in Iraq, being moved from one prison to another, the fact that he has American blood on his hands. As you say, you know, he might not necessarily be the best guy, but he is the only option right now. So should he be trusted and seen as some kind of pragmatic Islamist?
Well, first, trust but verify. And so far, he's done well. We were not happy, nor was anybody else, with the large-scale killing among Alawites in the west of the country back in the spring, and then the outbreak of fighting in July in Soweto with the Druze. But nonetheless, in contrast to Assad and his minions, or Saddam Hussein and his minions, or Gaddafi, al-Sharaa stopped the fighting, pulled back, has investigated it, at least halfway, and we haven't had a repeat. That's a step in the right direction. But more importantly, we took a decision after 9/11, President Bush, that we were not going to say once a jihadi terrorist, always one, but rather we would open the door for them to come back.
Yeah, I mean, when I've spoken to General Petraeus, he said that over 100,000 jihadis were brought into the fold. And he himself, just a couple of months ago at the UN General Assembly, in that period, sat down with Ahmad al-Sharaa and described him as incredibly impressive. But do you believe that this moment may not have been achieved under a different administration?
I give some credit to Joe Biden. As soon as al-Sharaa took over in December, he sent his Assistant Secretary, Barbara Leaf, to meet al-Sharaa. He lifted some of the terrorist designations, the ones he could, and he made it clear that we were going to reach out. But the other thing about Trump is he has shaped this whole region in an extraordinary fashion. He's used unquestionably strong violence Remember taking out Qasem Soleimani. That has had huge effects up until today. Then taking out Fordow in the Iranian nuclear program. Then allowing the Israelis up to a point to unleash full-scale war in the last few months in Gaza, then reining in the Israelis, basically, essentially dictating to them what the terms will be of a ceasefire with Hamas. This is high-level, almost, I hate to say it because I admire Kissingerian level of using muscular military force on one hand and then diplomatic flexibility on the other.
Well, what do you now see, not just al-Sharaa walking the international stage and being accepted by the United States and perhaps other Western allies and powers, but he does have an uphill battle when it comes to his own internal issues and the fact that we are still seeing the Alawite community terrified that he's not going to be able to unify them, the Druze community concerned, the Kurds are concerned. Is he going to be able to unify Syria so that we don't see an Assad 2.0 over the course of the next few years? And that in itself will become a problem not just for the region, but the wider international community.
You're absolutely right. This is the biggest problem. Thing we need is, and I'm in constant touch with Russians, with Israelis, with Turks, and with the Kurds on the ground, and indirectly with the other groups. We need the international community to take a position of embracing al-Sharaa, not trying to cut deals with our own private groups, but not try to let them exploit us and not exploit these times, but rather take a common position, which is the unity of the country, but cultural, language, and local governance and security rights to each of these communities.
That was Ambassador James Jeffrey speaking to me a little earlier. Now, Nigeria has rejected Donald Trump's claims that it's failing to protect its Christian citizens from religious attacks, saying his assertions are based on misinformation and faulty data. The US president has ordered Nigeria be put on a list of countries deemed to be violating religious freedom and has even suggested possible military action.
They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria. And they have other countries very bad also. You know that part of the world, very bad. They're killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers. We're not going to allow that to happen.
Donald Trump speaking there on Air Force One about a week ago. Well, to get a clear picture, Sky News has compiled analysis from Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Conflict Monitor. They've determined there have been almost 2,000 incidents of militia violence against civilians in Nigeria in 2025, resulting in more than 3,000 deaths. Of these, there were 17 recorded incidents of attacks on churches and 23 recorded attacks on mosques. There were 11 recorded deaths from direct attacks on churches and 48 recorded deaths from direct attacks on mosques. Historical data from the Conflict Monitor also shows that attacks on churches have not increased this year. This comes with a caveat. Given the complexity of militia violence in Nigeria, data for attacks on places of worship may be incomplete. These pictures show a mass burial after an attack on the 14th of July in Nigeria's Plateau State. Suspected militants from the Muslim-majority Fulani community targeted a predominantly Christian village. At least 20 people were killed. Local government officials say a church and houses were destroyed. Roughly 45% of Nigeria's population is estimated to be Christian or Muslim. Islam is the dominant religion in the north of the country, Christianity in the south. The militia violence appears to be evenly distributed across Muslim and Christian majority areas in Nigeria. Data from the social media monitoring tool Talkwalker suggests that searches for Christian genocide, Christian persecution, and Nigeria Christians surged in Nigeria following Donald Trump's comments. Well, Mohammed Idris is Nigeria's Minister of Information and National Orientation. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on the programme. I just want to get your reaction to what we've been hearing, not for the first time from the White House, but it seems Donald Trump is now speaking in a very firm way and putting this almost in, as part of his national security policy and agenda.
Well, first, thank you for having me. What we want to put out is that Nigerian government still insists that some of these assumptions that you have put out are based on data that largely cannot stand any scientific scrutiny. Yes, we do have religious issues in Nigeria. Yes, we do have security issues, especially in the northeastern part of the country, the northwest, and the north central part of the country as well. People are being killed in the mosques. People are also being killed in churches. We agree all that. And remember that when President Trump came into office the first time, he worked with Nigeria to ensure that some of these people perpetrating these crimes have been pushed, away from their sins, and this helped us to recover, some of the territories that were hitherto held by these terrorist organizations. So what we are saying is that we do recognize that Nigeria has security challenges all around, especially in the northern part of the country. But what we want the world to know is that the drivers of this conflict are diverse, as they are very complex, because we have economic issues, we have issues of land, we also have religious issues there. Very recently, even the Vatican Secretary of State also affirmed that, yes, indeed, there are conflicts, there are killings going on in Nigeria in many parts, but they're largely social issues. Responsible.
And so we have been hearing about the issues that Nigeria has faced, mainly around Boko Haram and also the persecution of Muslims and Christians alike in the country. Has the government lost complete control of parts of Nigeria? And is this what President Trump is referring to? Because he is using incredibly tough language now, saying that the response would be guns blazing if the Nigerian government doesn't curb the problem. And we've seen the likes of Senator Ted Cruz say that there's a mass murder of Christians. Commentators in the United States have even described it as genocide.
Well, let me say that Nigerian government has not lost control of its territories. I want you to go back in time. There was a time in the northeastern part of the country when these terrorist organizations were in control of about 14 local governments in Borno State alone. That is no longer the case because, Nigerian government has recovered all that territory. They don't hold any territory as such. These are opportunistic fighters. They go into the bushes, come and, do their attacks and then go back. But Nigerian government is in full control. You have to know that this is not a conventional warfare they are fighting. Sometimes they come into towns and villages and melt with the people who are going by their day-to-day activities. And so sometimes it's difficult to establish who is a terrorist and who is not. But when they are, where we find them, like in Sambisa forest, in parts of the north central part of Nigeria, in the northwestern part of Zamfara state, in Sokoto state, parts of Niger state, Nigerian government, Nigerian security forces are hunting them. They are going after them, killing them in numbers. I will say that since May of 2023, Nigerian security forces have eliminated over 13,500 of these terrorists, and about 17,000 of them have also been arrested and undergoing prosecution. We have not lost any territory. What we are saying is that, yes, indeed, we have these challenges. We need to work to understand, but the diversity and the complexity of the situation is what we want the world to understand.
There are those groups who have been investigating some of these numbers and these claims around the number of Christians killed in Nigeria. And they have said that the numbers don't add up in terms of the description by the Trump administration. But there are also lobby groups speaking directly to the administration and lobbying for the cause of the Christian minority group in Nigeria. How are you reassuring this administration now in the United States that you're doing whatever you can to protect minority groups and the concerns that they have for the Christian community in Nigeria?
Well, to begin with, Nigeria is a multi-faith country. Our constitution guarantees that everyone in Nigeria can practice Islam, can also practice Christianity. And this is what the government is upholding. There is no religion that is favored over the other. It is enshrined in our constitution, and this is what every administration, particularly the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has insisted that this is a multi-faith country guaranteed by our constitution, and we have to continue to guarantee the safety of lives and property of people wherever they are. Any life lost, whether it's a Christian or Muslim, any life lost is too many for our country. We want the world to know that we more.
But are you directly talking to this administration right now? Are you speaking, to members of the administration to reassure them of what you're doing?
Yes, certainly. Channels of communication have been open. I can confirm that. We are talking to them, and I think that they are understanding the situation better. We believe that most of this information is as a result of a lack of proper understanding, like I said earlier, of the diversity and the complexity of the situation that we have at hand. And let me also put out there, we are seeing direct connection between the people you mentioned, the lobbyists, the people that they are also talking to in the US. Some of these lobbyists have direct connection with proscribed terrorist organization in Nigeria. And we have seen how they have set up this lobby in the US and contacting people high up in the United States to help them to lobby for that. So you cannot rely on what a terrorist organization is also saying. If a terrorist organization is paying lobbyists to put their case, a Nigerian government will certainly not be happy with that. But what we are saying is that, yes, indeed, this situation is there. We have conflict in Nigeria. We have a security situation in Nigeria. But in the past, the United States government has helped Nigerian authorities to deal with this situation. So we are calling on them to partner with us once again to help push this, and then we have peace once and for all in our country. We do not want a situation. Nigeria and the United States are great partners, enjoying good relationship, country to country. We are having good relationship. So we feel sometimes surprised with some of these numbers coming from the United States and some of the stands taken by the administration. But for us, we want to tell the world that this is not the case, to appeal to them, and we share the concern of people from our country. We also share the concern from the international community, including the United States, about some of these killings going on. We also are worried about some of these killings happening. But what we want at this point is understanding of the diversity and the complexity of the situation, and we want cooperation at the regional body, on the international level, to help us to rid us of these manners of insecurity once and for all out of our country.
Mohammed Idris, Nigeria's Minister of Information and National Orientation, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is released from prison after serving just 3 weeks of his 5-year sentence.
She was beautiful, she was bright, she had so much potential.
This wasn't an accident. Those individuals that didn't do their job properly, as far as I'm concerned, Nick, they need to be in a dock.
I don't know why a local authority would be trying so hard to avoid scrutiny.
Is cover-up too strong?
I don't think it is. The evidence is there. Nanita should never have died.
Just got so many questions, and I'm not the only one.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the world. The former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is out of prison less than 3 weeks after he began serving a 5-year sentence. The 70-year-old slipped quickly into his home in Western Paris earlier today. He's subjected to what's called judicial supervision. He's fighting a conviction for criminal conspiracy in a scheme to finance his 2007 election campaign involving money from the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Well, let's go live to our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins. And Siobhan, Nicolas Sarkozy now desperate to clear his name. What next for him?
Well, I think tonight he'll just be thanking his lucky stars that for the first time in 3 weeks he's sleeping at home in his own bed. But as you allude to, this is far from the end of his legal battle. He's got another case that's due in court this month. And then, of course, the appeal in this conviction where he has been found guilty of conspiracy to fund his 2007 campaign with money from Libya, something he's always denied. Now, that appeal is due in the spring, so a lot for his team to work for. But let's just rewind a little bit to remind people of how we actually got here. So it was the 21st of October when he began that 5-year prison sentence, and judges have said that the conviction was so serious that rather than waiting to start his jail sentence for his appeal hearing, that he would start it immediately. So that's when he was sent to La Santé jail. And there we understand that he was kept in isolation, that it was very basic, a big fall from grace for the man who was the leader of France from 2007 to 2012. So he had basic amenities, a toilet. He was allowed outside for an hour a day on his own for supervised exercise. We understand that there were 2 police officers stationed near his cell because of threats to his life. But from the moment that he stepped into that prison, his team were fighting to get him out on some sort of bail condition. And today was his day in court, really, to argue for that. And when he addressed the court today in Paris via video link, he talked about the harsh conditions in the jail. He said he was exhausted and that he promised really to abide by any conditions they offered to allow him to spend the rest of the period that he has ahead of this appeal hearing outside on this bail type scenario. And the court agreed. They've let him out, but there are conditions. So he isn't allowed to leave France. He isn't allowed to contact any co-defendants or witnesses in the case. And there is a long road ahead. So while tonight his supporters will be celebrating, his critics will be outraged, this is far from the end of the legal headache for Nicolas Sarkozy.
Siobhan, thank you so much. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, a Gen Z revolution or a military coup. We sit down with a man who's taken charge in Madagascar.
are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. In scenes that have become familiar in parts of the world, a Gen Z-led uprising brought down Madagascar's president last month. It was September that the online group known as Gen Z Madagascar began protests over water and power cuts and the cost of living. By October, some soldiers from the CAPSAT military unit joined them. Very quickly, the unit claimed to have control over the whole armed forces. Madagascar's president then left the country while CAPSAT's commander was sworn in as a transitional president. But after the initial jubilation from protesters, there are questions about the army's intentions now that they hold power in the country. And from the Madagascar's capital, our correspondent Yusra El-Bagir sat down with the transitional president.
Madagascar has weathered a massive storm. A Gen Z uprising pushed the president to flee. As young people declared, the time for change has come. The presidential palace has a new occupant. The colonel who commanded security forces hold their fire and protect protesters is now in the seat of power. Appointed president in a takeover that saw the Senate and Electoral Commission dissolved, but one he refuses to call a coup.
We were not conducting a coup at all. It was the president himself who decided to leave the country.
Gen Z want practical change very quickly. How will you respond if they challenge your presidency as they have with previous presidents?
We can't do anything within 1 to 2 months, or 1 to 2 years. You can't conduct refoundation or recovery. And I think the Gen Z, most of them are educated people. They can understand what is possible and what is not possible.
What happened in Madagascar is being seen as a warning to old dictators on a very young continent. Do you think that old dictators in Africa should be worried?
I don't know what to say about the other countries, but I know my own country. And tomorrow, if the people of Madagascar hate me, then I will leave this palace.
The streets of the capital are recovering from the riots that changed the government and the country. This is the third military takeover in Madagascar in the 65 years since its independence from France, after the most persistent protests to date. Gen Z flooded the streets denouncing water shortages and power cuts that symbolized the government corruption that impoverished the country and destroyed their opportunities for employment. Security forces cracked down, and at least 22 protesters were killed and more than 100 injured, until the colonel and his troops stepped in.
Madagascar has become a bellwether for the rest of the African continent, a warning sign to old dictators that if they don't let go of power, Gen Z will take it.
The shift is being felt across Africa, with young protesters in Tanzania, Kenya, Cameroon, Nigeria, Uganda, and elsewhere taking note of Gen Z Mada's political win. We met the young organizers reveling in their success and gearing up for the challenges ahead.
We were living under dictatorship. There was no freedom of expression, and it is very hard to fight for that in Madagascar. We had to face being injured and losing our lives and the lives of our fellow students. Malagasy citizens who fought with us lost their lives too. This is what we went through. To me, we are halfway to victory.
Their young country is still reeling from old problems. The power cuts and water shortages that triggered national change are ongoing. And beneath the euphoria of revolution is the grief of what it cost. The family of 27-year-old Nekena are laying him to rest after he succumbed to a gunshot wound from the first day of protests.
He was my second son, and he was helping us so much. Now he's gone. I have to face it. I can't bring him back to life. I don't know what the new president will do for us because he just arrived. We don't know what he will do for those of us who lost loved ones or those who were injured.
Nicolas and his family have paid the highest price for this new chapter. And as time passes and the sense of loss hardens, Madagascar's new president will have to prove what his ascent is worth. Yusra al-Bagher, Sky News, Madagascar.
And Gen Z-led protests have been playing out elsewhere, demanding change and in some cases toppling governments. In September, Nepal witnessed a massive youth-led uprising that began over restrictions on social media. Within days, Kathmandu's parliament building and other government offices were in flames and the Prime Minister was forced to resign. But while protests in Nepal and Madagascar have led to regime change, protests in Morocco have been met with further repression. The crackdown, according to Human Rights Watch, has led to deaths and mass arrests. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, a second typhoon in a week hits the Philippines, killing 8 and forcing 1 million to flee.
Eastern Libya is the new doorway to Europe for people being smuggled from Africa and Asia.
We are close to Greece. You can see it.
We've obtained unprecedented access to the authorities.
Do you feel you're just scratching the surface?
We've been on the raids, out with the Coast Guard,
Absolutely desperate.
and inside the detention centres.
How did you cope with that?
To find what's pushing people to Europe and what's driving the authorities here to stop them. Eastern Libya is the new doorway to Europe for people being smuggled from Africa and Asia.
We are close to Greece. You can see it.
We've obtained unprecedented access to the authorities.
Do you feel you're just scratching the surface?
We've been on the raids, out with the Coast Guard,
Absolutely desperate.
and inside the detention centres.
How did you cope with that?
To find what's pushing people to Europe and what's driving the authorities here to stop them.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous.
We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
A super typhoon has hit the Philippines just days after another typhoon. More than 1 million people have been forced from their homes as the latest storm named Typhoon swept in. It's now tracking towards Taiwan's densely populated western coast, where it's due to hit on Wednesday. The northern provinces of the Philippines bore the brunt of Typhoon, with floods and landslides cutting off entire communities. Our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch reports.
The Philippines is no stranger to storms, but in the last 6 days, it's been battered. First, Typhoon Kalmagi hit, killing at least 224 people. And now this, the aftermath of what began as a super typhoon, Typhoon. These villagers know exactly what flooding can do. But there are still surprises, still bewildering sights. Lives turned upside down with increasing frequency, thanks to climate change.
This has been a very, very intense monsoon period, and there's been a lot of criticism, even protests about a lack of flood defensive and allegations of corruption too. Now, we're in a place called Suma Cab Norte, and just behind me, we've been told there is a whole community that's effectively been cut off, around 300 homes, about 1,500 residents.
There were winds of up to 185 kilometres an hour when it hit, making this bridge look like it was made of paper. Crashing into Aurora in the northeast as it made landfall. Some swimming through the streets. In all, 1.4 million people were evacuated. Jennifer fled with her 5 children and grandchildren. This was what they faced, trying to wade through waist-deep water. We feared for our lives, she says, that we might drown. It's sad and it's hard for us because we're poor, and now that we're flooded, we need to start all over again. Marie also escaped. For now, the clean-up operation looks pretty overwhelming.
We're scared because the impact of the wind that night, it's so very fast and so very scary, and the flood, it's so very fast.
Do you think you'll be able to get back soon?
I hope so. I hope so. We came back soon.
The typhoon is headed for Taiwan, downgraded, and here, not as devastating as feared. But extreme weather is becoming more common, and life for many in the Philippines a lot less secure. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Nueva Ecija in the Philippines.
And that's it from me and the team from The World for tonight. We're back tomorrow from 9 p.m. My colleague Anna Botting is next at the news at
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.